Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for finding the time to join us for this webinar, which is a Q&A with Alison Evison, the President of the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. My name is Susan Smith and I'm the Editor of News Services at SCVO, and I'm currently working on the Never More Needed campaign. Before we get started, I'm just going to outline a little bit of housekeeping for everyone involved. Throughout the webinar, all participants except the panel are muted, and they will remain so during the webinar. You can, however, submit questions to the panel using the Q&A function on the control panel. We've had loads of questions submitted in advance, so I would really encourage you to use the upvoting element of the Q&A function as well. This means that the panel will get the questions that are the most important for you to be answered. The webinar is also being recorded and it'll be available on the SCVO website after the event. We do have a quick poll as well. So as I'm introducing the webinar and our panel, that will pop up on your screens. If you could take the time to answer it, I'll go over the results of the poll at the end of the event. So today we're going to be discussing how local authorities in the voluntary sector have delivered services together during the coronavirus pandemic. We're looking at lessons learned and how we might work together to rebuild Scotland for the better in the future. This ties in with the work that I'm doing on Never More Needed, which is a UK-wide campaign to highlight the role of the voluntary sector in COVID-19 and ensure that the voluntary sector has an active role in rebuilding the country for the better. Our panellists this afternoon are Alison Evison, President of COSLA, Ian Bruce, Chief Executive of Glasgow Council for the Voluntary Sector, and Anna Fowlie, Chief Executive of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. Before I hand over to Councillor Evison for her introductory remarks, I thought I would give her a bit more of an introduction. She has been a Scottish Labour Councillor for Aberdeenshire Council for the last 8 years. She's a former co-leader and has carried out a variety of roles within local government and national advisory groups. As a former high school teacher and mother of 4, I am quite staggered with the energy that she has shown to local government over the years. Her knowledge of the community and voluntary sector also includes the fact that she has chaired her playgroup and school board, her local gala committee, the Parents Association and the local hall committee. She has also sat as a representative on her community council. So she clearly has a vast experience of both local government and the community and voluntary sector, so I'm sure she'll have a lot to add and a lot of insight. So Alison, perhaps you can now kick off with telling us your reflections on how councils and the voluntary sector have worked together during COVID-19.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Susan, for that introduction. Yes, as you said, I'm Councillor Alison Evison. My home council is Aberdeenshire, and I'm President of COSLA, the third female President of COSLA since it was formed in 1975. Throughout my life, both as a councillor and before that as well in my own community work, I've been guided by those key principles of equality and justice, and that's obviously key to my work at COSLA as well. In particular at COSLA, I've been focused on removing the barriers to elected office in order that our organisations can better reflect the modern, diverse Scotland that we all live in. And it's also essential to do that if our communities are to be properly and democratically represented. I've also been working closely with colleagues to do all we can to tackle poverty in Scotland and the inequalities that poverty brings. The challenges of COVID-19 have highlighted real vulnerabilities across all our communities that we will have to work together to address as we move towards recovery and renewal. Scottish local government, as a respected sphere of governance in its own right and most closely connected to local communities, can work effectively in partnership with the third sector and public sector partners to make the difference required to our communities, especially those experiencing poverty and injustice. In terms of COSLA and SCVO, I'd like to say a few things. We're both, of course, membership organisations, and relationships between our two organisations are very good. COSLA's political leadership agreed last August, building on an original partnership agreement from 2009, that SCVO and COSLA should work together to develop a partnership agreement which would have political review. This agreement would set out clearly the principles of positive partnership working. There's a commitment from all parties to put in place mechanisms to support implementation and to strengthen accountability, which were limited in the previous statement. So this new version is stronger and better for both parties. Like everything, of course, as we know, things have been paused because of COVID, but we're working well in partnership at the moment, so hopefully we'll be able to continue to build on our current learning experiences when we get back to reviewing and looking at that partnership agreement. We meet regularly in joint fora. Much of our work is complementary and we work hard with one another, particularly around employability and the care sector, probably because both our organisations have a real intense common interest in the local, in essential services, and doing our best for local communities. Locally, local authorities work well with the third sector, and we provide services together for our communities. We are not naive enough to think this always works really well, but the important thing is we do deliver together, and we work hard together, and we're prepared to learn how to get it even better. However, we've been hit, as we know, by this pandemic, and much of our work going forward will be about recovery, will be about renewal, and how best to achieve this. If we are to build the new better, then again we have both a joint interest in making that work for our memberships and our communities. And we know that finance will become more and more of an issue. And here again we have similar concerns, and members of both organisations are facing real financial challenges. There can be no denying that local government and the voluntary sector have been affected by austerity and the impact of this financial crisis on public services. We've campaigned together on this before, and we need to do that again. We just don't yet know the totality of the impact that COVID-19 will have, but together we need to argue for proper funding of local services so that we can both better mitigate the worst case scenario. We should use all the opportunities we have to lobby together for multi-year settlements for local government and for you, our partners. Thank you for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison. That's given us a lot of food for thought. I'm now going to bring in Ian and Anna. As the Chief Executive of the local support body for the voluntary sector in Scotland's biggest city, Ian has seen firsthand the areas where the relationship between the voluntary sector and Glasgow Council have been going well and not so well over the last few months while we've responded to this pandemic. And Anna brings a national perspective, including reflections on how the voluntary sector across Scotland can be enabled to do more. So perhaps I'll ask Ian first of all to come in and tell me where you think the voluntary sector and local authorities have been working well and perhaps not so well over the last couple of months.
Absolutely, Susan. And I think, first of all, I think it's clear that the third sector has responded really, really well to the coronavirus, and certainly in Glasgow, which already had hugely high levels of poverty underlying before this hit, the sector's adapted really quickly to make sure that people are supported. It's really important. And I think what we have seen in terms of the quite powerful joint working between public and third sector is that very quick sharing of information, understanding the challenge, and building partnerships in very different ways from what has gone before. So historically, if we were to do something with the local authority in Glasgow, no criticism, but you would be writing papers, you'd have multiple meetings, you'd 6-month plan, 9-month implementation plans. We set up, as a very basic example, we set up a joint helpline with the council, the HSCP, Scottish Fire and Rescue, and other partners to answer calls from people in crisis in a 6-day turnaround from it being an idea to receiving calls. That's really exciting. So I think there's something really powerful in there. I think where things haven't worked, it's not malicious, and it's just around understanding. And what we've seen through this process is bits of all public sector agencies, and councils aren't exempt from that, learning very rapidly about the third sector and its approaches and the types of areas that you get into. So I think that's the weaker bit, and that's some learning for us, that there are bits of Glasgow City Council that operated in areas that were less relevant to the sector 6 months ago, and we didn't have the relationships with that might have helped us at this time. So it is, as ever, always about relationships.
Thanks, Ian. Anna, what about you? Have you seen good and bad practice?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I would agree with Ian that the speed of things happening has been really important, and it's been really interesting to see that, and that real emphasis on the local. So the power of local communities doing things, whether it's things that were already being done before or new things. I mean, there's been a real upsurge in new initiatives by community groups and communities doing things together, which I think is really, really valuable. I think it's interesting. I suppose my reflection is we've been able to do this, like resilience partnerships, for example, where are really patchy across the country, but suddenly they've become really focused on doing things because there's something to be resilient to. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that sustains, because it's all very well doing things and to deal with a crisis, but a lot of it would be really good to be imported into whatever normal looks like. So I'll be interested to see, Ian's example about speed of decision making is one, and some things which were thought to be absolutely vital to protect us from risk and all the rest of it are now maybe not so vital, but that's probably because we have to take risks because there's no risk greater than what we're being faced with the pandemic. So how will that all rebalance as we come out of that is what I'm interested in.
And Alison, you might have reflections more from an Aberdeenshire point of view in terms of what you've seen going on locally in terms of how the voluntary sector and your council have got on, or where there's been strengths and weaknesses in how they've responded.
Yes, thank you. I think what I've seen locally in Aberdeenshire reflects much that I've seen going on across Scotland as well. I think there's lots of commonality, and I think that word that Ian used, relationships, is key in all of that. A lot of good work has gone on. There's been building on local relationships, and council staff have done fantastic work showing adaptability and agility to a changed situation, and so too have our partners in the third sector. And when they've come together with that adaptability, that agility, being able to work at pace, it's been fantastic. I think the key behind all that is it's been work at the grassroots, it's been work in communities, with communities, for communities, and I think that has made a huge difference when we've all been really focusing on that community involvement at the grassroots level. We haven't been hung up with bureaucracy because we've had to get on with it and do it, and that's made a difference as well, and being able to work at pace. But a key, I think, can't be overlooked is the funding as well. The funding has been available to do a lot of this work because we've been fighting a common cause in the pandemic, and we've had funding to do that from the Scottish Government and from other sources as well. And so I think that's key to it as well, when we don't have to worry about day-to-day funding streams, about where the next money is coming from, about that sustainability. We're able to focus on working with a community to deliver. We're able to do that at pace. So building those relationships is key, working together with adaptability is key, and having the security of the money behind it makes a huge difference as well, I think.
So the next question sort of picks up on some of that, Alison. It's really about whether or not all of this has led to a change in your vision for how local communities can be built to meet the needs of people for things like care, food, health and well-being as we recover from COVID-19.
I don't think it's changed a vision. I think it's enhanced a vision in many ways. A lot of the work we were doing before COVID started was based on empowerment for our communities, empowerment functionally for local public services, working with the third sector locally as well, and having that fiscal empowerment. So communities, locally, councils, third sector could make the decisions required for those local areas. And I think what we've seen is that locality empowerment helps things work. So I don't think our vision has changed. We're still looking at providing services to our communities in terms of the priorities faced by local communities in order to meet that common aim. So the vision's been enhanced, I think. And what's come clear through it is that partnership working. If we're working together, third sector, local councils, we're far better positioned to be able to develop that vision and succeed where we want to succeed.
What do you think, Ian? Have you had a change of vision or a change of perspective, given everything that's gone on over the last few months?
I certainly think. I mean, I think Alison's right in that the overall vision of achieving for communities remains the same. I think there is a lot of learning that sits underneath that vision and how we might approach it. And I think, you know, certainly we've touched on already. You know, the how is important. So what we've seen and what we've been talking about in Glasgow is a little bit about how communities have responded when they've been given the space to do so. A lot of what third sector organisations have done in the city has been about organisations having the knowledge of the problem that they're faced, some resource, which has been really welcome from Scottish Government, and local resource, but also the space, the sense that actually you can get on and do something in that. And I think that's really important. And it's the challenge that we will continue to make to the local authority, and I'm sure others will across the country, around actually, yes, it's important that it's local. Yes, it's important that there's a local authority involvement, but give communities in the third sector some space to play part of the role, and don't always assume that everything needs to be led and controlled within the local authority. And I think that speaks to hopefully some of what Alison was saying in terms of the relationship and the strengthening of that.
Do you have anything to add, Anna?
So just very briefly, because I agree with all of that, is that I think my vision hasn't changed, but I think the vision for Scotland is the National Performance Framework and what's outlined in that, and that still holds true. And what we have seen is that in action, particularly the values, and what we've seen as well is community empowerment in action. And I think we are lucky. I'm in calls regularly with other parts of the UK and Ireland, and we are lucky with the political context and rhetoric that we have just now, and some of the policies that we have, and indeed community empowerment is in legislation. But the actual enacting of that and implementation of that is a bit more inconsistent. And I think what we're seeing is that is happening, and we need to really hold on to that and make sure it doesn't get lost in an over-focus on economic recovery. I think we really need to focus on well-being and inclusion, and I think that's something that absolutely unites local government and the third sector. The how might differ, but that commitment does unite us, and we've got a task there with government to keep them on track with that, I think.
Thanks. I'm now going to move on to some of the questions that have been submitted in advance and some of the questions that are coming in the Q&A. Before that, I think we're going to have the poll popping up on your screens, so feel free to respond to that, and we'll go over the answers at the end. So first up, we've had a couple of questions on trust, which I think does pick up on a lot of the things that Alison, Ian, Anna, you've all been saying. So I'm sort of going to hone in a little bit on funding and how you think improved trust in voluntary organisations can translate into better funding, and whether there are methods that can be put in place to help that happen. Sorry, Alison, would you like to answer that first?
Sorry. Yes, trust is important. Trust at a local level and trust nationally as well is really important to help things work and to help things happen as we wish it to happen. I think in terms of finance, there's the overall context that we can't avoid, in that local government is really struggling for finance. We're facing more and more challenges ourselves, and I think the key point is we need to lobby together for more funding for our communities to deliver on those key values as Anna described it as well, the National Performance Framework, and moving forward. We've seen much work on well-being, we've seen the development of kindness in many ways, we've seen all this happening, but in order to take this and fly with it beyond COVID, we do need to have that funding in our communities as well. Local government cannot support with money we don't have ourselves. There's a joint argument here. We need to work together and lobby together for that money. COVID is creating huge challenges to councils as we're having to look at doing things differently. The reopening of schools and all the issues around that will be a huge financial challenge for councils. We've got issues around care developing as well, and how we're going to pay for and manage care going forward in the future. All this tremendous work that councils have been doing, and the third sector with shielding and supporting individuals. You know, there's costs involved in all of this, and we're moving forward to a situation where the council budgets that were written in March, February time are no longer applicable at all. They were very much based on being balanced from council tax income, from being balanced from income from services provided to local communities which people paid for and which income was generated, and they were based on making transformations and therefore getting savings through that, and all that work has gone. We can't do any of that now. So yes, trust is important, but within the trust is also realism that councils cannot support with money we do not have. So I think we need to join together with our shared priorities. We need to raise that voice that together we're doing a tremendous job to support vulnerable people in our communities, to stamp out inequalities, to stamp out poverty, to be there where people need us in each area. We're doing that. We can do far more if we have security of funding and have sustainability of funding as well. So I think it's not so much trust. I think it's, well, trust is important, but that's not the problem here. The problem is lack of funding overall for all of us. And please let's lobby together. Please let's raise this voice together, because what we're doing is serving our local communities between us all.
Thanks very much. Ian, do you agree that it's not a trust issue, that it's a financial issue? Because certainly the number of questions we've had in about trust would suggest that some people in the voluntary sector are feeling that they've been trusted more recently, and that level of trust is something that needs to continue.
I think that's probably true. I don't think Alison is wrong around the primary concern that we have locally is around, you know, the overall pot, and so much of that, you know, for the sector depends on what local and Scottish government do, and I appreciate that what Scottish government do is you know, heavily predicated on what the UK government do, and I think there's a whole economic context to that, and obviously, you know, we have to consider whether we see a UK government that returns to austerity as the best way out of recession, or one that perhaps sees a different way that can support recovery and sustain quality of life and a lot of the well-being things that Anna was talking about. But alongside that, certainly what we've seen in the city is a lot of what, you know, obviously a lot of what organisations have done has come from new money, Scottish Government new money being delivered, but actually a significant proportion has been delivered through existing funders, including the local authority, turning around to organisations and saying, we know we're currently giving you money to do something. We get that that might not be appropriate, and we're comfortable with you doing whatever you think is right for your community. So I think there's something in there that's quite powerful, and I know, you know, we've heard from a number of organisations that are saying to us, look, we need to be able to plan to help people. We can't quite work out yet what people are going to need, but we know we're going to need to help them, and we're going to have to be adaptable to that, and it makes doing funding applications quite challenging. There's another bit which for me is about the how local authorities do grant processes and how they think about grant processes, and getting beyond thinking of it simply as supporting the third sector, and actually thinking of it much more importantly as part of their strategic commissioning of what they're seeking to achieve in communities, and how that is therefore led by what communities are looking for. And I think we need to really think about how we do that more effectively. There is something about whether grant application processes, as we currently do them, are always the right way. You know, we've started in this country to think about participatory budgeting right at the edges of grant giving, but actually the potential for that to be much more dramatic in the future is key, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. I'm going to have a quick look at some of the questions that have been submitted. We've had one from Ian McLaughlin. who says, I agree with Alison about the local authority and voluntary sectors working well together locally in response to COVID-19. What does COSLA have a role in when this isn't the case? What is COSLA's role when this isn't the case? So a little bit of acknowledgement, Alison, there, that perhaps local authority relationships with the third sector don't always go swimmingly.
Yes, we've had ups and downs. Of course, we have. Had examples of good practice around the country, and we have had examples that we want to learn from and move on with. That's the nature of relationships and how things develop. And I'm sure we'd all agree on that point as well. The key point here is we're learning what works and how it works, and taking forward the good practice that we've got in a local area. And I think the emphasis that Ian was bringing out there as well on the locality, on what works for a local area, is crucial in what we're doing as well. We're all looking at localities. We're all looking at what works in a particular area. I think even at the informal grassroots level, so much has happened. So much has happened with people coming forward who've never stepped forward before to help, who've offered themselves to our third sector partners or to the council, or just doing their own bit locally to support others. It's been tremendous. And all that we need to build on and work together from that basis. We have that trust that comes, that we've talked about before, is crucial in moving forward, but with that trust comes that mutual understanding as well, that sense of let's sit down around the table and talk about our shared priorities. COSLA has some role in this, but the best work will happen in the local area, not at a national level. The best work will happen when it's a permissive environment locally for people to do what's right without being hung up by bureaucracy. And we recognise the problems of bid systems and grant applications and things like that as well. Local government has to face that in many ways, in the same way as the third sector does, and we have the same response to it as you do. So it's not always the most effective, and we can join together on that one. I think there needs to be a better way of doing money so that we can make things move forward effectively.
And Anna, as a representative of the national membership body for the voluntary sector, do you think that's fair? Do you think there should be a bigger role for COSLA in representing the role of the third sector to local councils?
Well, I think that's interesting because there's often a misconception that COSLA is the kind of HQ of local government or the boss of local government, when it isn't. It's like us, it's a membership organisation. And there is, you can have a support and challenge role, but you do also have to represent your members, and that's the role. But I think we see that with work that happens in COSLA in the I've forgotten what executive groups are called now, boards, the different boards where councillors from all over the country get together on specific issues and do share practice and share learning. But I think like any, like lots of things, I think there can be a bit of, and in our sector too, if it's not invented here, and a bit of it, so if, you think, oh, well, it might work in Glasgow, but it's never going to work in, Angus or something. I've made that up, that's not a real example. But there also might be a bit of an assumption that everything that happens in the big places is really good. So the cities have it sussed, whereas actually we see some really, really good stuff happening in Dumfries and Galloway and Orkney. Things happen all over the place. And I think that's the beauty of COSLA and SCVO, any national. In fact, I see Kim Atkinson's on the chat there from the Scottish Sports Association. Any intermediary or membership body like ourselves, as would a TSI do at a local level, the beauty is you can share all that learning and you can kind of break away from the biggest voice being the one heard, and you can kind of amplify some of the smaller voices.
Great. And thanks. Ian, do you have any thoughts on this from a local perspective?
Not a huge amount, but in addition to what Alison and Anna have said, but I suppose the final thing I would say is, having worked in this role in 2 local authorities, it's rarely as simple as the local authority is good or bad at working with the third sector. It is about, again, it's about people, it's about departments, it's about history, it's about relationships, and the complexity of that and the challenges that people are under. So I think I would certainly be cautious about any role that saw a bit of the system kind of told off for doing it wrong. I think Anna's right. It's about identifying good practice, and there's a key role there for TSIs. I'm not going to name examples, but but there are things that I have done in my previous role and my current role that have worked really well in terms of building collaborations with councils, and it's about how we look at that and go, right, actually that might have been about, and I'm going to deliberately say that might have been about building roads. It can be adapted to collecting rubbish, and I'm deliberately using those examples because they're things that we just wouldn't tend to get into, and I don't want to incriminate myself or anybody else in the conversation.
Great. We've also got a question from Susan Hunter from Youth Borders, which reflects some of the questions that we've had submitted beforehand about young people. Susan's saying we're currently in the public health crisis, but there's quickly approaching an economic crisis. And she's wondering what the panellists' views are on how we might take what we've learned from the initial response to COVID-19 and use this to inform our response to the looming economic crisis. And in particular, how we might respond and support young people to be optimistic for their futures. And I'm going to ask Ian to come in on this one to begin with.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, when you look at the challenge, the health, we know where the health crisis has hit and which demographics have been hit there, but there's little doubt for me that young people will be at the forefront of those that are affected by the economic crisis, as are other key. Again, we've been reflecting that people on the lowest incomes are going to be hit hardest by yet another crisis, as they were with 2008, as they were in 92, as they were in the 80s, as they were. It's the cycle that we live with. So I suppose that's the context. I mean, certainly in Glasgow, what we're looking at is a recession, potentially a recession that would have sort of 5 times the number of job losses that we saw in 2008 at its worst. Now that's quite scary, and we know the impact that will have on young people in terms of them coming into work and seeking to get involved in the job market for the first time. So really critical there that they're supported, and the context of that, as Alison's alluded to, is that our investment in our public spending is barely at the level that it was last time around. It's barely recovered, so it's a real challenge. That said, I think what we've learned in terms of the collaboration in particular is critical. We need to rapidly design in the same way as we have rapidly redesigned services 3 months ago because digital wasn't appropriate. We now need to rapidly redesign services to make sure that they're appropriate to deal with both a better way of working potentially, but also the scale of the challenge that's coming.
Thanks, Ian. And I'm wondering, Alison, whether you have any thoughts on how that's going to happen.
Well, first of all, the question is really, really important. It's been asked on behalf of with young people, and I think that's a crucial way forward. That this is something we can't do 4 or 2. We need to make sure that young person's voice is heard in anything that we're redesigning as we are building the new better and moving forward. My own council in Aberdeenshire has adopted a children's charter in which we are committed to involving young people's voices in any decision at all made by the council. And as councillors, we hold officers to that and ask for what was the input of young people on this decision, on this paper that's come forward to us, so that we can make a decision based on young people's voice as well. We need to involve young people in discussions about the future far more than we have done in the past, both locally and nationally. I had contact from the SYP last week from about supermarket access for young carers, and we had a question came into us and we were able to give a response because we had that direct relationship at national level. We need to work locally at that as well. The question itself seemed to have 2 strands to it. It had a strand about mental health and it had a strand about economic future as well. That mental health area is crucial. We need to be very aware of the impact this is having on young people from the mental health point of view, being at home, unable to have the freedoms. worrying about the future, what that might bring, and the stress and the strain of disrupted exam courses. Where are we going? When can I see my friends? All that kind of thing is crucial. So we need to think very carefully about mental health and work together on that one. Economic issues, yes, the job market's going to be tough. There's going to be changes in what we know, and we need to work together with a focus on that building together, which means that looking at skills, looking at apprenticeships, and not losing sight of the importance of things like training programs and apprenticeships. You know, when we're moving forward, that is not an add-on at the end, that's a luxury. That is essential to what we're doing. So any economic development has to think, right, short term we need this, longer term we're going to need that, and we've got people at the heart of it, and we've got to work with people, and we've got to think about the apprenticeships and working appropriately with them. Throughout all this, councils do have a key role ourselves. We're the councillors' role is that democratic accountability, to bring that into what we're doing, and that's crucial in every aspect of this building the new better, to have that democratic accountability within it. And that means as well listening to that voice of young people and working with the voice of young people, and hopefully encouraging more young people to stand for election themselves as well, because that's the best way to get their voice heard around the table, to actually have them sitting there as elected members themselves. So we need to work together encouraging that bit as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison. Anna, do you have any thoughts in this area?
Yeah, so two aspects. I think on the employability thing that Alison was alluding to there with the apprenticeships and whatever, what really is worrying me in all of this is that given the job losses and employment situation that we're likely to have, we will have a lot of quite highly skilled, experienced people looking for jobs. So the people that are currently furthest from the labour market will probably be even further from the labour market. So, and those are the people that both councils and the voluntary sector tend to work with most. So that's a concern for me, and I know the minister responsible is alive to that as well. How you address it's another matter, but I think that's a concern. But also thinking about young people, one of my daughters refers to is saying she's really worried that this generation is going to be referred to as the coronials, because they're going to have sort of, as opposed to, she's the tail end of millennials, and that's not a good thing. And it reminds me of a conversation I was involved in last week with a young person who said, our generation which was about 20, has been dealt a rubbish hand by your generation. We're being expected to clear it up, and now we're being blamed for spreading the virus. And I know there was a lot of stuff about the Black Lives Matters thing, like the anger has been outed, and I think anger is heightened just now because everyone's locked down. So things that you would normally be passionate about, people are actually really angry about, and understandably so. So we're at a point where our society is quite divided, probably even more divided than it has been over various issues that we've seen in the past. So that cohesion and that unity and listening to the anger and working with it rather than trying to suppress it, I think is a really important thing.
Thanks, Anna. We've had a number of questions about equalities issues, really, and it picks up on a question I've got here from Hannah Dixon at the Scottish Community Safety Network, who's asked what priorities need to be for public services during the recovery and renewal phase to build back better, particularly thinking about how the recovery is green. And you've identified, Alison, that we've got immense challenges as public service providers, both within councils and within communities. Do you think there are mechanisms to prioritise the most important elements of public service right now, or is that something we shouldn't be considering?
No, we certainly should be considering it. It should be an important part of our work. We've got to be focused on priorities because we have so many challenges that we need to have that direction of what we're doing. And that green, that environmental issue is a key aspect of it. As we're building new better, we can certainly focus on the environment in a way we've talked about maybe and not had so much action on. This is a time to put those words, those thoughts into action because we've got that transformation opportunity. And looking at things from a green perspective is a crucial aspect of that. Looking at inequalities across our communities, we've seen and had reference to the data about the BME community in particular, not just through the Black Lives Matter, but before that as well. And we've seen how particular groups are suffering more within the current situation. You know, we've got an opportunity now to look at that, to address that, to make sure that inequalities are stamped out wherever we can stamp them out. We've seen as well that women have been particularly badly affected by the situation. A lot of people in lower paid work, the care work, having to be at home now with families, homeschooling, working at the same time. A lot of that is falling on women in particular, and domestic abuse and issues like that growing as well as part of that. We've got these values, we've got thinking about vulnerabilities, new vulnerabilities, we've got thinking about the green economy, we've got the sense of what we want our country to be like, our communities to be like moving forward, and we've got to hold to those values and prioritise everything we make, you know, assess every decision about the economy in terms of the green revolution, the green environment issues. You know, that's something we can do at this point and do more effectively than we've done in the past, because I think there's a desire. Anna talked about the anger, you know, but we can also channel that. We can channel what people are feeling, and that is our responsibility as leaders in councils and in leaders in the third sector. We've got a shared responsibility to use those positions to pick out these priorities and to focus our values effectively moving forward.
Great, thank you, Alison. And Ian, do you think that's achievable? From a voluntary sector perspective, at a local level, do you think their current mechanisms enable that, or do you need a whole new approach?
I think we have to make sure that we learn some of the approach that we've picked up in the last 3 months. I think let's not kid ourselves that inequalities that we're seeing are new. They are going to be made worse. They will be made worse over the next 2 to 3 years, no doubt. But there is a real danger for me that many of these inequalities have been accepted. We've accepted them for decades. We've tinkered around the edges and done bits. But that actually, what the coronavirus has brought with it is this real awareness, and I think that's what's led to, as Anna described, the anger and the awareness of it. There is a real risk that as we go back, that organisationally, and this isn't a local authority or a third sector thing, it's a people thing, it's a human nature thing, that we go back, and the easiest thing to do is to go back to old ways. And we have to show the leadership now to challenge that. You know, it cannot be about going back to very long strategic documents, strategic planning processes that we sit, and white people, mostly white men that look kind of like me, sit in a room writing strategies about how we're going to help reduce inequalities. That hasn't worked. It was never the right thing to do. But if we don't take this time, this right now, the last couple of months, the next few months, to really put a line in the sand and say that didn't work, we have to do something very different. We will not be able to beat the natural inertia of organizations to going back to do what they did before.
And Anna, do you feel that there's an appetite in the discussions you're having with people in the public sector and government and the voluntary sector? Do you think there's an appetite for people creating solutions that include risk?
Yes, I hope so. Yeah, I think it's what we've been saying about almost all of these issues. The talk is good. It's the implementation that we need to make sure it actually happens. And I think there's an interesting tension in terms of the economy and the environment, which Scotland's got good words around, but I think it's particularly difficult for local authorities, where they're trying to regenerate their town centres, and therefore you probably are encouraged to build car parks and provide parking spaces. But actually, what needs to happen is better public transport, or there's a whole lot of choices that have to be made. And there's an issue around the public discourse about this, because the public will want what they think is right for them as individuals. So there's something about trying to engage the public, and that's what we mean by communities, isn't it? It's people, the people that live in our communities need to be engaged in a way that really understands the whole context that we're living in. Because people talk about being really committed to environmental change and to, you know, the support for saving the planet is higher than it's ever been before. But when you talk to people about not having a car, they get really cross about it. So there's just something about working with the public, I suppose, like a citizens' assembly does. So you have expert input, you have people discussing things, and then you can make informed decisions based on, like, making informed decisions. I don't think that answered your question. It's what was in my mind, sorry.
No, that's great. I think I'll jump on back to one of the other questions that's been submitted, which has come from Kim Atkinson of the Scottish Sports Association. Kim says that she's pleased to hear Alison talking about working together to campaign for better public services, but she's wondering about the definition of public services and whether the distance between the public sector and public services can be brought a bit closer. Her example is community clubs, sport along with culture, heritage, youth, and whether or not these can be seen as part of the public offer and not seen as secondary to this or as competition, which she obviously feels has been the case. What are your thoughts on this? Alison, we'll kick off with you.
Thank you. I think the thoughts are based on locality, and we're going back to grassroots. We're talking about what's important to a local area. We're talking about what the people in a community need to make their community tick. Then sports, then leisure facilities, then the hubs, the clubs locally become part of that mix locally. So I think to answer that question, the best thing is not to look nationally on that, is to look right locally in the local area. In my ward, where I'm a councillor, you know, that there's been an ongoing campaign for local sports pitches to be developed, and the decisions involve local people deciding what they want, whether it's going to be hockey, football, or whatever, and how it's going to be developed, the local facilities, and do other people rather have an allotment there than a sports field? You know, we've had that kind of discussion locally, discussing those kind of issues, and I think that's where the answers belong. I think the answers belong in a local area. If we're talking about building and transforming and developing our communities for people to live, work, and have the quality of life that they want and they deserve, then we need to start talking more locally as well, and involve that youth voice, involve all the voices that aren't heard at the moment, and make sure we have that proper discussion at a local level. What happens nationally is we set the structures in which that can happen. We create the environment where that kind of discussion can go on, and we encourage people to be able to set up what's needed locally to enable the discussions. We're the enabler, I suppose, in that sense, to do that work. But locally, I think, is the answer. COSLA itself is at the moment having lots of discussions with various sports groups as part of the moving forward and the building the new better. And sports is a key aspect of that, because sport in itself is a way to answer those well-being issues, the mental health issues. Lots of things come in through from supporting sport. So we need to look at that. And COSLA is doing it nationally, but the real answer is working locally in the local area, I think.
And Anna, do you think SCVO has a responsibility to help break down the distance between public sector and voluntary sector when it comes to the delivery of public services?
Yeah, and I've long been an advocate of using the term public service rather than public sector, and you may have the Scottish Government talk about public service reform, but they quite often mean public sector reform. So I think there is there's a distinction to be drawn there, but it would be much better if we look at it from the other end of the telescope, as I think we've all been saying, which is what matters to people and what matters to people in the local community. Who it's delivered by and how it's delivered really doesn't matter, as long as it's delivering for them, I think, is the most important thing.
But that kind of brings us back to funding, and whether or not, Ian, do you feel there's a better way that communities can access funding and funding can be spread out across the community, that's not about local authorities and then the largesse of a local authority and giving a small grant to a local community organisation.
Sorry, Susan, my connection cut out at the end of that, so I think I got your question, but if I go off on a tangent, stop me. I think there's a lot in there. It is very much for me around understanding what a community needs, and I, you know, because of the job I do and the background I have, I think there is a lot of value when third sector organisations are delivering things, particularly where third sector organisations are doing that from a place of empowering the community to take action on their own behalf. And I think that's really critical. But that's not to say that local authorities can't take approaches that do that. So I think there's a bit in there. It is about money. It all too often is about money. And I think some of that is around, again, that understanding. And I'm going to give an example, and I'll tell her that about this example, that I said this example, but always remember a conversation with the chief exec of the HSCP in Inverclyde, which was my old job, where I explained to her, and I don't think she'd ever understood this before, that when we were talking about parenting support in Inverclyde, that she needed to understand that a different bit of the local authority was charging parent and toddler groups for a space to meet up. So that it's a really silly example, but that very simple community infrastructure of parent and toddler groups that helps parents build the connections, build the resilience, enables the HSCP to engage with them. But actually that group was being, those groups were being charged 30 quid an hour to come together. Now that's peanuts in the system of public funding, but it's just that understanding of what's needed in a community and how we resource it that could be significantly smarter if we were more collaborative in how we approach things.
And I'm just going to have to ask you, Alison, whether you have any thoughts on whether or not that's possible. Councillors are such mammoth organisations. Can they work smarter like that?
We certainly need to work together better. Everyone needs to work together better. And I think what Ian was alluding to there was an old way of silo working, which maybe wasn't effective in different councils having different budget lines and needing to move away from that. I think we are moving away from that. I think there's an understanding that how we finance public services needs to develop and be more based on that place-based, locality-based. We've got town centre approaches, designing, influencing what many councils are doing in one way. We've got tackling child poverty as another overall theme that councils are looking at. We've got supporting vulnerable people and everything coming into that group as well. So I think we are moving away from particular silos that exist in the past, and that's an important part of the work. I think I must emphasise throughout this, though, the key role of a local authority and that political accountability within it. I think when we're talking about local communities, we've got to remember how important democracy is in that. We've got to remember how important developing equalities is in that, and that voice from the elected members is our safety net, I suppose, on democracy. And we need to make sure we always have that overview, and that's why that political role of councils is also important. Some areas are better than others at developing things. The third sector is stronger in some areas, I'm sure you'd agree, than it is in others. It's like council, it varies across the country what's delivered and why it's delivered in a local area. So I think we need to have that political oversight of everything going forward as well, to ensure that there is that fairness and the developing equality as well, and that money is allocated where it can have the best response in a particular local area. So I don't think we must always realise the importance of the democratic accountability and the political oversight as well.
I think that's a really important point to finish on, Alison, and the little key message there is everybody remember to vote in your local council elections. Before we finish up with a little bit of personal reflections, can we get the results of the poll up, please? We asked you, has your own voluntary organisation's relationship with local authorities improved during the pandemic? 45% of you said yes, 25% of you said no, and 30% are unsure. Sorry, I'm actually surprised that not more people said yes, because in the conversations I'm having with people, there is a feeling that things have improved. But it's good to get that little temperature gauge. in order to finish up, I think I'll just go to ask the panel to give us their reflections potentially on that, and just any thoughts you have personally or professionally about how COVID-19 has changed the way you're going to approach things in the future. And we'll finish up with Alison, and we'll start with Ian.
Susan, I thought I had a few more seconds than that. I think the poll's really interesting. I suppose there's that challenge in terms of data gathered like that, and you know, have people not said that it's improved because that's already good, you know, and that kind of data thing. So I think, but certainly what we've seen at very grassroots level is a significantly better relationship and a really strong understanding by the local authority of the contribution that the third sector has made. So, you know, quick decisions by the local authority to unrestrict existing funding pots and to guarantee organisations that funding would continue and give them the flexibility to operate as they need. Even very operational things in terms of council staff being able to get involved in third sector projects. I mean, across the city, you know, virtually every councillor in the city has been out supporting third sector organisations, very hands-on support. So I think there's a lot there that isn't just about the immediate response, but about the connections and the relationships that have been built going forward. For me, I think I've already said it, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's about just to emphasise it. We need to capture what we've learned. We need to understand the lessons really clearly about what we've done well and what hasn't worked in this, and we need to think about them and we need to build them into how we go back to doing things in future. My number one fear right now is that in 6 months, 9 months, coronavirus is just something that happened and we go back to how we were operating before, but with just more problems and less money, because that's not the future that we want to see.
Thanks, Ian. Anna?
So I think for me it's rekindled, even grown even more my sort of love of grassroots football. So I think grassroots football actually is an example across all of everything we've talked about just now, where you've got charities, third sector organisations, you've got local clubs, local groups that aren't charities but are very much part of the sector, you've got the community, you've got mums and dads and whatever, everybody is involved in that, professional clubs are involved in supporting it as well. And what we have seen, and there's some really good studies on this, is the contribution that makes to local communities, to local people. It saves money for health boards, it saves money for the police, it saves money for councils, and yet trying to get a janitor to come out on a Saturday morning to open the clubhouse is quite challenging in some places. So I think there needs to be some recognition. We've seen amazing stuff going on through football, through the pandemic and before, integrating refugees, working with people with dementia, like fantastic, and now food distribution and all sorts of things. And I think there needs to be some appreciation, one, that football isn't all about Manchester United or Celtic and Rangers, but also that it makes such a contribution to our communities, and there will be other examples, but that's the one that really resonates for me.
Yeah, brilliant. And Alison, what are your?
Well, first of all, I echo everything that's been said by the other panelists here today, and I think the key bit is what we're emphasising. There's a lot we agree on. We've got the same values, the same vision, and we want the same things. And I think that's an important point. We're all committed to partnership and working together as effectively as we can. And we're committed to partnership because we're committed to our communities and working in that local area and involving everybody in delivering the services and supporting people as best we can. I think it's really important that we seize the opportunity we've got now to do things differently as we build a new better, and that's a phrase I think we all need to keep using as much as we can, but seizing the opportunity jointly together, and that includes lobbying for money as well to make sure things can keep happening. So let's develop a partnership, let's make it work, and let's together deliver that vision. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's a great end to the event. Thank you very much to all of our panellists, to Councillor Alison Evison, to Anna Fowlie and to Ian Bruce. And thank you everybody who's joined us. And there's been lots of chat going on throughout the event, which we've been dipping in and out of. Thank you for everyone who's submitted questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. But we'll be doing more of these webinars to discuss the impact that COVID-19 is having on the voluntary sector. So there'll be lots of other opportunities for you to submit questions to panellists and experts from across the voluntary sector, public sector and private sector perhaps. So thank you very much everyone. Goodbye.